Hi everybody, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to talk about Rhinos in Modern. This Rhinos deck is crashing into Modern and staying in Modern as a force. And I think as an even stronger force as the deck has become more and more stock and people have really figured out the best 75. If you're still with me, I apologize for the cringy joke. Let's jump right into it. So this is Rhinos. So it is playing 5 colors. It is primarily Teamer, splashing for some other goodies, splashing for Teferi, Leyline Binding, and playing Scion Draco for very cheap. The deck is centered around this card, Crashing Footfalls. So what Crashing Footfalls does is it creates 2 4/4 green Rhino creature tokens. However, it has no casting costs but suspend 4. So in order to play this at retail value, you suspend it and then can get 2 4/4s 4 turns later. We can cheat this onto the battlefield on turn 3 by cascading into it, Living End style, with Violent Outburst and Shardless Agent. So the goal of the deck is to deal with what our opponents are doing, remove their stuff with Fury and Fire, maybe tap down some counter magic, Dead and Gone, Leyline Binding. All of these cards are to interact with our opponent and remove stuff. We can also interact with counter magic with Force of Negation or stop counter magic entirely with Teferi Time Raveler. Cast one of these cards and get 2 4/4 Rhinos as early as turn 3, and then further use our interaction to clear the way and win very, very quickly. This is an efficient deck. This is a strong deck. And initially, the weakness of the deck as you see this, it means I can't have anything costing less than 3. That's why we play Fire and Ice. We play Fire and Ice because technically the casting cost of the card is 4, but we can cast it on turn 2 and interact with our opponents. Same thing with Dead and Gone. Technically the casting cost is 4, but we can cast it on turn 1 to interact with our opponents. Leyline Binding we can cast as early as turn 2 when we grab the right Triomes and Dual Lands to interact with our opponent as a 1-mana O-Ring. Fury we can cast very, very early by either pitching Violent Outburst, Fire, or Dead and Gone. And Scion of Draco we can cast as early as turn 2. If we have all 5 colors, this just costs 2 mana, which is our alternate win condition in addition to Fury in the late game. Being able to jam in. So Fury, again, we're playing as interaction, but it can be a win condition in the late game. Scion of Draco, casting like a 4/4 on turn 2, and then forcing your opponent to deal with that while also fearing the Violent Outburst Shardless Agent into Crashing Footfalls is the incredible part of this deck. I really think Scion of Draco actually pushes this deck over the top because like you can either bash in with Scion of Draco, make them tap out to deal with it, and then Violent Outburst or Shardless Agent, because notice Violent Outburst is an instant speed card, so you can cast Crashing Footfalls at instant speed. If you have a Shardless Agent and a Violent Outburst, and no other interaction, you can Violent Outburst on end step, make the Crashing Footfalls eat the counter magic, untap Shardless Agent during your turn, and then they need 2 pieces of counter magic. When you have things like Teferi that could just stop that, you have things like Force of Negation that can stop it for free on turn 3. Being able to force a negation on turn 3, on my opponent's turn, we Violent Outburst, they counter the Crashing Footfalls, we are able to counter their counter. Or if they ever cast a Teferi Time Raveler, which Teferi, in the case you don't know how a Teferi Time Raveler interacts with Cascade, it basically says you are not allowed to Cascade. You can't cast these things. When you Cascade into something, you're casting something not at sorcery speed, so you can't actually cast that spell. So it's a great way to stop opponents' Teferi Time Ravelers in their tracks, in addition to Leyline Binding, sure. But this is all interaction that technically costs more than 3, so you can't cascade into it, but can be cast for much cheaper. Really, the only things in this deck that are cast at retail are these Cascaders, these Enablers, and like Teferi. And Teferi is amazing because it means you get to fear nothing. You can just like cast your stuff and everything's great. So as far as the sideboard goes, you play Leyline of Sanctity. These are mostly for like Thought Seizes or burn spells. Also very good against Archon of Cruelty. It sort of means just our deck is just better than a lot of our opponent's decks when we cast this card. Mystical Dispute for these Murktide decks or these decks that we know are going to be bringing in a lot of counter magic, because we have to make sure the Crashing Footfalls hits the battlefield. A big way that you fight this deck is you make it so they never get the cool Crashing Footfalls thing, and you force your opponent and bring in all of these like Flusterstorms and stuff to deal with the Crashing Footfalls, which means that we have to kill them with Scion of Draco and Fury, and being able to Mystical Dispute their Spell Pierces or whatever is really important, and especially against Murktide, being able to take out like the Murktides and the counter magic is strong as well. We're also playing Leyline of the Void. There is a Dredge deck slowly popping back up, but this is mostly for like Living End. You know, in addition to Teferi Time Raveler, we just get to try to be the strongest deck. The thing about Living End against this deck is that we are just trying to put creatures on the battlefield as fast as possible and kill our opponent. And if Living End ever properly resolves, it wipes our board. So we need to, like with Leyline of the Void, we sort of need to make sure that Living End cannot resolve properly. Playing some Obsidian Charmaw, killing non-basic lands is a pretty big deal. You know, as Tron pops back up, as Scape Shift becomes more and more popular, especially Temur Scape Shift. It's pretty good against the 5-color decks because it can like choke them on their colors because most of them only run like one of each of the triomes that matter. But this is mostly for these Tron decks, which can often don't care if we play out our cards, and like a lot of our interaction doesn't interact with them, so they just kind of like poop on us. And we're playing 4 Force of Vigor. These Force of Vigor is for things like Amulet, especially for Hammer Time. The thing that this deck fears are decks that are just faster than us, because we are the ones that want to be the ones speeding to the end of the game. And so playing these Force of Vigors against these artifact decks are very, very strong. So hope you enjoyed this deck tech. It's kind of a shorter deck tech for me because there's not a lot to talk about. This deck is extremely straightforward and has absolutely, maybe barring a couple slots in the sideboard, has totally found a stock list. And this main deck is just like wildly stock and incredibly consistent, and I encourage you to try out Rhinos. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on other social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.